Hey there, welcome to the channel. So today I want to talk about natural gas in Europe. Okay, so one of the things that I have seen is that we can take a look at natural gas storage in Europe. So we obviously have the situation going on in Ukraine, and right now Russia has reduced the flows of natural gas to Europe. Europe is scrambling because they're heavily reliant on Russia for natural gas imports via the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, and then they were going to build the Nord Stream 2, et cetera, and other pipelines as well. And so there's this real scramble right now in Europe to try to get their storage levels full. So now I was able to go over here and find this website over here, aggregated gas storage inventory, and we can see the storage levels. So you can see here that overall for EU, what you see is that they're currently at 78% full storage. Okay, so they're getting there. They're getting pretty full. So whatever they're doing over there, they're trying to conserve gas. Whatever they're trying to get as much in, even though the fact that Russia had reduced the flows from Nord Stream down to like 40% of the maximum, so they're able to get that up. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about here is that here's the gas storage. Now, the gas storage uh, is here, it's in, I believe, terawatt hours. Okay. And then over here, we want to look at consumption. Now, if you look down at that double asterisk, the little note, this is for 2020. This is the consumption for the whole year. So this is per year. So, for example, the EU consumed 4,151 terawatt hours for the whole year of 2020. Okay. So that's kind of our reference point here. And then what we have over here is that we have the stock of natural gas divided by the consumption in percent. So what does this thing mean here? Okay, so what happens is if you have 875 and you're using 4,151 on an annual basis. Okay, so if you take and you divide the stock 875 by 4151, you get 21%. Okay, so what that means is at this level, currently they have 21% of their annual consumption based on 2020 numbers, currently at 78% full. What that means is they have 21% of their annual consumption in storage. Okay. So now if you at and look at a typical natural gas inventories chart, and you'll see this for the US as well, and here's Europe, you can see that as storage levels tend to increase going into the winter months, going into the fall, and then they decline until we get through to the spring. And this is very typical because a lot of the natural gas is used for home heating. And this is, in essence, the reason that countries have natural gas storage, because you have a situation where in the spring and fall, there's not much gas being used. However, there's large demand for gas in the winter months. So you can see how the levels build and then go down. Now, in this particular chart over here, what you see is the current storage is this blue line. So you can see that the current storage actually was kind of low here, right? So going back to the end of 2021, the storage is kind of low. The blue line here, you can see that it's lower than typical years. So you have the green line is the 5-year average, and then a year ago is the orange line. So what you can see is the blue line, they've been working to catch up. Just one thing to note where they currently are here is they're right at the 5-year average, and they're right at they're better than they were a year ago. So if you look here, the year ago is this orange line down here. So Europe is in better shape than a year ago in terms of the amount in storage. However, they're at the 5-year average. So when you look at these numbers and you see where Europe is at, and you say, hey, they're at 78% full, that's good, but that's not untypical. That's right at the 5-year average. So this is right now, whatever's going on is not unusual given the 5-year average data that we have. So looking at that, what you see is that, currently they're at 21%. And what that means is, think about it this way: 25% is one quarter, right? So they're not quite to one quarter of a year's worth of gas and storage. And that lines up with this. Conceptually, we have four seasons, right? You have the winter, spring, summer, fall. Winter is when most of the natural gas is being used for heating. So one quarter of the year. So ideally, you would have in your storage 25% or one quarter of your yearly consumption in storage when you go into that winter month, right? That would mean that you basically are able to level out this curve and you have plenty of natural gas throughout the year. Okay. And that's kind of where we're at. So you can see that Europe is not quite there yet. I mean, they're at 21%. So that's pretty reasonable. Other countries, some are better. Austria is at 62%. So now looking at it as percentage of the year, 50% of the year, you have a half a year's worth of gas. Here we have almost a quarter of a year, a winter season of gas. So some of the countries are better off at, 25, 30, 38% and stuff like that. Germany's at 20%. So Germany is where they're at. Hungary's a much better position. And yeah, some countries like Latvia is like in pretty good shape. So I've seen some videos and they kind of point out the percentage of gas full, but we really want to look at this number over here, the amount of gas and storage over the consumption, because that's really what's important here. So for example, you have some countries that may have no storage at all and they have zero, right? So but they still have consumption, and so that's kind of the situation that you want. So I really think this is the important number, and given what we see right now, Europe is where they typically are on the 5-year average in terms of their storage. So what has happened is they're not in better position than they were any other year over the last 5 years. Okay. Nothing's really changed. Okay. Even this is I guess that's really good given the fact that of all the problems with the Nord Stream 1 pipeline and what Russia's been doing in cutting that back. I just want to take a minute and look at replacing Nord Stream 1, because this is the pipeline that is one of the biggest ones, and it's one of the ones that is down at 40% capacity, probably going to drop down to 20% capacity. So what Europe is doing is they're trying to replace it with LNG, liquefied natural gas. Now, here's a chart I found about the number of LNG tankers. So for 2021, there was 700. So this is actually a little more than I had thought. So we're going to have 700 natural gas tankers. And then we can look up and try to get the capacity. So they're saying the average cargo is between 125,000 and 170,000 cubic meters. Okay. And that's 1,000 cubic meters. Okay. So that's not million or billion. Another thing that a stat that we'll look at is there's 104 million cubic meters of cumulative storage capacity estimated worldwide as of 2021. And so what that means is there's 104 million cubic meters of tankers that were able to ship around. So you can imagine that a tanker is like, okay, I have 125,000 meters, and how many trips can I make? So let's go look at some of that math. The comparison here, we're going to start off with Nord Stream 1. So here we are, cubic meters, right? And so Nord Stream 1 is a heavy duty capacity situation, right? So it has the capacity for 55 billion cubic meters per year. Now, if we look at the number of active LNG carriers, 700, and the LNG ship capacity, 150,000 meters, 150,000 cubic meters, pardon me, per ship, what you can do is how many shipments per year to replace Nord Stream 2. So you just simply take the 55 billion divided by the average capacity, and that's going to tell you how many shipments. Now, how many shipments per ship? Now, what you do is you divide that by the number of ships, which is 700, and then you end up with, 524 shipments per year per ship, because you only have 700 ships and you need 366,000 shipments, right? You see what's happening here? So you can see that an optimistic would be a ship could do a turnaround in a week. And given that, you're really short the number of shipments. So if you kind of did that, you would say, hey, look, I'm short 471 shipments per year to replace the capacity in Nord Stream 1. So if Europe wants to get off Russian gas, this is the problem that you have. You have to replace this 55 billion cubic meters per year, and you only have 700 ships. Sure, they're building more, and the capacity is only 150,000. Sure, newer ships, I bet they're, you can see that they do have larger capacities. Even if you assume double 300,000, you still have a heck of a lot of shipments that you need every year just to replace that. And the additional thing is, you know, it can be very confusing to read a lot of these articles, because what's happening is they will talk about they're putting in these regasification plants and regasification ships. Now, what happens is you need a facility to take the natural gas, which is actually a gas, and you have to cool it down and compress it and to turn it into a liquid, and you have to keep it cool. You load it on the ship and then you ship it. And then on the other side, you have to do regasification. You have to take and warm that up, blah blah blah, and let it turn back into gas. So one of the issues that you have is they're talking about they're putting in all these new ships and they're working to add all this capacity at the regasification end, and that's all fine and good. But the problem is, if you have something where, hey, we put in, 20 billion cubic meters of regasification, and you start adding up these numbers and like, oh, you're going to replace Nord Stream in no time. Well, not quite, because you still don't have the capacity. Just because you have the capacity to regasify, it doesn't mean that you actually have the shipping capacity to get the stuff from, the United States, get it gasified over there. So a lot of that you will see out there is not quite, it's not the complete picture. So another thing I want to take a look at is I want to look at this chart from Reuters. Now, if we look at this chart, this is European monthly LNG imports in BCM, billion cubic meters. Now, if you remember, the Nord Stream 1 is 55 billion cubic meters per annum. In this particular chart, I'm really just going to focus and look at what was January of 2022 here. Here they're claiming that they have over 16 BCM of natural gas, LNG imports. So let's take a look at that and try to understand, does that make any sense? I have some questions about this, and let's go look at those numbers. So going back to my spreadsheet here we have the 55 BCM there of Nord Stream capacity, and we're just taking this number here. They're saying that they imported 16 BCM in January of 2022. Now, as a percent of Nord Stream, that would be 30% of the Nord Stream 1 capacity in 1 month that they've imported by LNG. That's what that implies. Now, how many shipments to get 16 BCM per year? Well, what we can do is we have our 700 ships and that capacity, and we can basically say, well, you need to get in 16 BCM. So you divide that by the capacity of the average ship, and then which is 150,000, and that tells you how many shipments. So you need 106,000 shipments. Now, keep in mind we're at 30%, and 106 is it's more like almost a quarter, but it's about a third, right? So it's kind of in the ballpark, right? So you see what I'm saying? You're just kind of quickly checking the numbers. So about a third of the number that we had here in terms of shipments. Now, shipments per ship is 152 per ship because we only have 700 ships. So looking at the data from that chart, do we really have a situation where with only 700 ships that even if every single one of those ships was only shipping natural gas to Europe, okay? And if that was the case, you had 152 shipments per ship in the month of January. That's what that implies. So this isn't for the year. This is for what? This is for January of 2022. So I don't know what's going on with that chart. I suspect it's off by a magnitude of maybe 1,000. I suspect that maybe there's a conversion issue, but it's not clear to me. I know the chart kind of goes off into million metric tons, and there's a conversion I found here to BCM, et cetera. One of the things you can look at, the tanker capacity is 104 million cubic meters. So I checked the capacity of the ship by dividing. Basically what you could do is you could take, if you have 104 million overall capacity, divide it by the number of ships, And what do you get? You get about 148,000. And that kind of matches up with my LNG ship capacity. So, in terms of if I looked at the chart that I had shown you from Reuters here, and you look at that chart, and if that number is correct, that they were able to import 30% of the Nord Stream 1 in 1 month in January, and they were able to import that amount of LNG into Europe, then there's no problem. There's absolutely, incredibly no problem at all. But that number doesn't line up with the other data that we have. So when we're going to do an analysis, we look at data from different places and try to get to, like, we have, it's just a ballpark kind of estimate, and try to figure out, now, is it possible that these 700 ships all went to Europe and all did 152 trips? It's not possible. It's not possible for them to make a trip to Europe from somewhere where the natural gas is coming and do that in 2 days. That's what that implies. So it's not possible. So therefore, it seems to me and that there's something wrong with that chart. And my guess would be is they're off by a unit of 1,000, right? So instead of BCM, it's probably MCM, million cubic meters. But I don't know. I can't say for sure. But it points out one thing, that we want to kind of like try to check our numbers and check things from different places, try to get different sources and try to figure that out, because then we can get an insight. So now, going to the summary and leading towards the conclusion of this. So given that Europe has now imported a lot of LNG and got a lot of natural gas, they've got their storage up to almost 75%. So the first thing that we note is, okay, storage at that level for this time of the year is right on the 5-year average, as I showed you in the previous chart. So that's good. They're not behind, but they're where they are every year. So that is a positive sign that they should have enough gas in the current situation to get them through the winter, okay, based on that. Secondly, we look at what they need to replace in Nord Stream 2, and we do these calculations, and they're short the combination of the number of ships, the capacity of the ships. They're short almost 500 shipments per year in replacing that. So that is a grim picture. So looking at that data, it's just a horrifically grim picture. The point is that, can they replace Nord Stream 1 capacity with LNG? And the answer is yes, of course they can. They can work on doubling, tripling these ships, doubling, tripling the capacity and the shipments and everything. Yes. But that's a 10-year project, right? It's a long, long, hard road of infrastructure development. Okay. So that's in 10 years from now. Okay. Other data, we look at some data here that we're not sure what to think. If it is in fact true that somehow all these other numbers are wrong and they were able to import 30% of Nord Stream 1 in 1 month, then there's essentially no problem, right? There's no problem at all. But it doesn't add up with the other numbers. How do you get 152 shipments per ship in 1 month? It doesn't make sense. So my conclusion is that these numbers here, there's something wrong. It doesn't add up. I get this data from one particular chart, which references another chart, and that's all I have. This data here I'm getting from a couple different places up here. So in my conclusion is that there's something wrong with this, and I don't think that we can rely on it. Now, given that that's the situation that we're in, their storage is where it normally is for this time of the year. If they're able to keep that going, then Europe will make it through the winter. Okay, so that's what it looks like. So there is a positive here. Europe can really make it through the winter. However, going into next year, this hasn't resolved any of the long-term issues. This is the long-term issue. This is the amount that you need to replace. Now, I get it. Maybe they're not using the whole capacity. Maybe they're not using the 55 billion. And that's certainly most likely, right? But how much are they using? Blah, blah, blah. Why did they build Nord Stream 2, et cetera, et cetera? Someone was planning to use twice this, in matter of fact. Okay. So in the big picture, if Europe really wants to get off Russian natural gas, this is a super long project. It's a decades to replace all the Nord Stream, all the Russian natural gas to replace it with LNG. In addition, there's consequences to that. One of the consequences is that environmentally, it's a huge setback. Like if you're on the green side and you're trying to get the carbon-free energy, right? This is a disaster because you're talking about because you're upset with Russia for the crap that they're doing in Ukraine, which it's horrible, and I'm not happy about this either. But because of all that, you're going to try to punish them by trying to cut off using their gas. Well, that's a 10-20 year project, and that's a 10 to 20 year project just to get back to where you were last year, let's say. Okay. So if you were trying to make progress on reducing the carbon emissions, you just took a back seat for 10 years. Okay. It's important to understand you just took a back seat for 10 years. That has been pushed to the side. Green agenda, all that stuff has been pushed aside for a decade just to resolve this particular issue. So that's something that you really need to think about. If you're a green person, you really need to think about that. And I know that you dispout that, we need the Green New Deal now. We're just going to make solar, blah, blah, blah. And that can do some of it, but it can't actually replace it. And I've done a video and you can go look at that. It is because the energy density of those is so low compared to natural gas, compared to nuclear, that it's just not a viable option on a worldwide stage. I live in Southern California. Solar and wind, as a matter of fact, is pretty good here. So we could replace decent chunks here, right? And we can mitigate the on-off of it. But in other parts like of Europe, this is just not even really an option. So that's one of the consequences of it. The second thing is that you really have no choice but to try to shut the thing down, meaning that you get through the winter here. And let me say this too, because we know that there's been many months now where the capacity, the Nord Stream was shut off. And then it was brought up only at 40% capacity. And my understanding is it's going to go to 20% capacity after another shutdown that's coming. And how then did Europe get to 75%? Well, what they're doing is they're conserving. And so the second part of this is how much damage is being done by this conservation. In other words, damage to industry. How much has Germany deindustrialized at this point? How much are they putting off and how much damage is being done to their economy because they don't have enough natural gas. And so at this point, it's probably very subtle. It's probably not noticeable in the macro data at this point. But at some point, it's going to come very apparent that it's going to be like, oh, industrial production dropped off a stone. Industrial sales dropped off a stone. Oh, we're in a recession. All this stuff is going to start piling up because it's very difficult. They need the natural gas for the industrialization. So what you're talking about is deindustrializing of Europe, which is a very dangerous thing. Okay. It's not really a good thing. So in conclusion, this is the kind of problem that we're facing. The fact that Europe got their storage up to where it normally is, this is good. It's a good thing. I think it'll get them through the winter, but it does not resolve the longer term issue. It does not resolve getting rid of Nord Stream 1, trying to get off that Russian natural gas. So some people are trying to claim that, hey, everything's good. Russia cannot bully Europe anymore with natural gas. That is 100% not true. This is a short term thing. They've got themselves through the winter. That's all they've done. Come the spring, come the next winter, they're in the same situation. They have not. How many decades is it going to take to go to 7,000 LNG ships? It's going to take decades to go to that, to get the shipments down. So nothing is really resolved in the long term. And the fact that you hear out there that some people are like, oh, everything's resolved and this is all good, shows short-term thinking, because these type of projects, this type of stuff, this is projects that have to be designed, planned for on the decades. They take decades to get this done. All right. Well, that's it for this one.